If you're wondering what it would take to get to $1 million investing in something like VOO, then that's what this video is all about. Hi, my name is Micah, and in this video, we're going to go over 3 things about VOO that you need to know. First, we'll cover an overview of VOO and why it's a popular choice, including some things like the expense ratio and also the performance of this ETF, as well as a surprise feature that not many people talk about. Second, we'll cover the type of person that this ETF is for, including things like goals and timelines. And third, we'll go over how you can get to $1 million invested in VOO starting from zero by just investing a little bit of money over time. VOO is Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF. An ETF, also known as exchange-traded funds, is a collection of stocks grouped together into a fund. The purpose of this is to allow you to invest into one instrument, the fund, instead of having to individually invest into many different stocks. This simplifies the process of investing for people and also diversifies their holdings among many different stocks as opposed to having just a few companies that they're invested in. Now, Vanguard has been a giant in the ETF industry by providing low-cost products for their customers. VOO in particular is the third largest ETF with $448 billion in assets under management. Now, the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF tracks with the S&P 500 index, which is the largest 500 companies in the US. Having an S&P 500 ETF like this allows you to simply invest in the 500 largest companies in the US by purchasing just one instrument. Because the technology sector has been leading the way for many years now, this is going to be heavily tilted towards that sector. In fact, technology makes up 30% of the fund's value, followed by finance at 13% and health at 12%. VOO is comprised of many large cap companies with a lot of growth potential as well. Some of the main holdings is Microsoft with 6.8%, Apple with 5.8%, Nvidia with 5%, and Amazon with 3.78%. As you can see, the larger companies will make up a larger percentage of the fund's value. So Microsoft and Apple by themselves are more than 12% of the fund's value. In fact, if you included only the top 10 companies, then that would make up 32% of the fund's total value. Now, there is one way to tell if a fund is stable, and that's by its portfolio turnover. This is the amount of times that a company is moved in and out of the fund, so the lower this rate, the better. It means that it's more stable. Now, in most cases, you want this to be below 5%, which tells you that this fund is relatively stable and there's not a lot of movement in and out. For VOO, the portfolio turnover is 2%, which means that this is a good stable fund. The cost or expense ratio of the fund is another important factor to consider. If the fee is too high, then it begins to eat away at the returns that you potentially could get. Now, in the case of Vanguard's VOO, they have a very low expense ratio at 0.03%. That means that for every $10,000 that you invest, you'll pay $3 in management fees. VOO's purpose is to track closely with the S&P 500 index, and since it's composed of the same companies that populate the S&P 500, it should track pretty closely. If we look at the 3, 5, and 10-year performance of VOO, we can see that it's returned 8% after 3, 13% after 5, and 12.37% each year over the past 10 years. And if we compare this to the benchmark S&P 500 rate, we can see that this is almost exactly the same numbers. 8% for 3 years, 13% for 5 years, and 12.41% for 10 years. One thing that's not mentioned much when discussing VOO is the dividend yield. It actually offers a 1.39% dividend as well, which is paid out quarterly. What this means is that if you had $100,000 invested in VOO, you would get $1,390 a year in dividends. Now let's take a look at what kind of person the VOO ETF is for. Now, because this ETF is heavy into one sector, there is some volatility that's built into that. As we can see from Morningstar's rating, historic risk on this is an average risk, while the return is above average. What this translates to is that over short periods of time, there may be some risk that's involved, but over the long stretch of many years, the returns are actually pretty good. This ETF is right for someone who can handle some volatility in stocks. You understand that it may go down 10% in one year and then up 15 or 20% in the next year, and that's perfectly fine with you. You understand that overall, the rewards are going to be worth the risk. It also means that you have time to weather out an extended downturn in the market. Let's say things turn down for 5 or 10 years. You're not going to need those funds for the next 5 to 10 years, so once the market rebounds, you'll be okay. So in short, perfect for someone who has a little bit of risk tolerance and also an expectation of moderately high returns in the future. So let's look at what it would take to go from $0 today to $1 million invested into VOO. Now, we'll be using historical data to project out what we believe the fund will do in the future. While historical data does not always indicate what will happen in the future, it's our best guess to project what we believe the fund will do in the future. You should always do your own due diligence before purchasing a fund, and of course, if there are any questions still, you should seek out help from a professional in your area. Now, we've seen that this fund over a 10-year period averages 12% each year, so we'll be conservative and assume a 10% return. As mentioned before, we're starting with $0. We have a 30-year time period, and we're assuming 10% interest. Let's see what happens if we contributed $100 each month into this fund. Our ending balance over a 30-year period would be $226,000, with $36,000 of that being funds that we put in place. So in this case, we're nowhere near $1 million, so let's increase that to $300 a month and see what would happen. Our ending balance for this is $678,000, with total contributions from us $108,000 and the appreciation on the fund $570,000. So we're getting closer, but one more step. Let's do $500 a month. We actually do reach our $1 million goal and have a little bit extra, but we've only put in out of our pocket $180,000, with $950,000 of this being appreciation in the fund. If we take a look at the schedule, you can see how each year that the interest on this gets larger and larger until eventually in year 8, it overcomes the amount of our actual input into the account. So we're earning more on interest after year 8 than we're actually putting into the fund each year. This is how compounding works. Over time, you're making interest off of your previous interest, and it just begins to snowball into a larger and larger amount until eventually you see what's happening in this graph here, where you're just gaining more and more interest each year. Now, there is one additional component that not many people talk about in relation to VOO, and that's the dividend payments. Let's take a look at the dividend payment that you would get from VOO if you had been investing $6,000 a year for 30 years. We have our principal balance of $1.13 million times our yield of 1.39%, which gives us an annual dividend of $15,710. This is what's paid out in dividends only, plus you have your principal balance of $1.13 million invested in VOO as well. Now, to be honest, VOO is probably not the ETF that you want if you're nearing retirement, because there is some volatility involved. While taking advantage of the dividends from VOO would be a valuable resource during retirement, there is actually a better place to put your funds to get dividend income. You're going to want something a little bit more stable that may be focused more on dividends as opposed to growth. And to learn more about dividend investing, you can check out this video here. Again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.